No. I'm not going up there. No.
Somewhere between Morgan Ortagus getting a hair blowout at a Beirut salon and Tom Barrack scolding reporters at a press briefing, the US envoys doubled down on their main demand: Hezbollah must disarm. After a visit to Israel, the pair arrived in Lebanon this week, where they discussed the terms of a plan for the group to hand over its weapons to the state by the end of the year. But it's not so simple. In early August, Lebanon's cabinet approved a decision to disarm all armed groups, including Hezbollah. It was an historic achievement. At the same time, the country is stuck in a chicken or egg scenario. Israel, which has violated the ceasefire agreement hundreds of times, said it would not withdraw its troops until Hezbollah disarms. Hezbollah has said it will not lay down its weapons until Israel withdraws. But the pressure on an economically devastated state is mounting. And with a weaker Hezbollah and Iran, Lebanon has little leverage and not many other options. This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada AlTaher. In this episode, we look at the circumstances that are now bringing Hezbollah to the brink of extinction as an armed faction, and we explore whether Israel is able to act in good faith to honor its part of the bargain. How are we here today, after 2 years of escalating violence between Hezbollah and Israel across Lebanon's southern border? I start the conversation with the National's foreign editor, Mohamad Ali Harisi. Ali, how did we get here since the beginning of the summer when it all happened? There's a letter from the US involved. What was in that letter and what was the response to it?
Let's try to unpack it event by event. Hezbollah fought Israel. Hezbollah lost the war. Hezbollah and Israel reached a ceasefire agreement. Israel had guarantees from the US that it can continue strike Hezbollah and other targets despite agreeing to the ceasefire deal. So Israel continued striking Lebanon. The new government found itself in a very difficult position. Donors and foreign countries said absolutely no money for reconstruction unless the situation changes completely in Lebanon. And changing the situation basically means that the state has to have full control over arms in Lebanon. So Hezbollah has to be disarmed in order for two things to happen. One, Israel ease its attacks. Two, Lebanon receives funds and money and regional and foreign support. After almost 6 months or 7 months of continuous, relentless strikes against targets in Lebanon, almost 600 breaches of the ceasefire agreement, the US went to the Lebanese government and told the president and the prime minister, look, you're in a very difficult position. You don't have options. And this is a paper with instructions and guidelines on how to do that. The main item in the document is that disarming Hezbollah has to be voted in a cabinet session. The state did it. Hezbollah and Amal and its ally Amal rejected, of course. The Shiite ministers left the session. The vote happened anyway. And then disarming Hezbollah became a formal government decision. Then the government told the US, we did it. Now it's Israel's turn to do a step and de-escalate. Israel, because it's emboldened in the region, it told the Lebanese, no, we're not going to do this until the Lebanese army, which is tasked with coming up with a plan by the end of this month to disarm Hezbollah by the end of this year, start the process. So it's a matter who does what first. Then Barak went to Lebanon and he gave the Lebanese government some kind of economic incentives. He was saying, there is no de-escalation. Israel won't de-escalate. We won't de-escalate. What you did isn't enough. You voted, but now you have to start.
Do you think that they are going to start? Is it an easy process? Will they be facing any challenges? Do they even have the ability to disarm Hezbollah?
It's illogical and unrealistic to think even for a second that it's this simple. Hezbollah is not an armed group. Hezbollah is a state within a state. Hezbollah has schools, hospitals, banks, financial institutions. It has thousands of fighters. Some of them have 2 jobs, and some of them have only 1 job, which is to fight for Hezbollah's causes or in Hezbollah's wars. So how can you imagine this huge political and armed group? How do you imagine it coming to you and telling you, oh yeah, here are my arms, here are my weapons, here are the missiles, and thank you so much. I'm going to turn into a political party. I'm going to send all these fighters home with no future, with nothing to do. I'm going to close all my institutions. I'm going to give you the weapons, and I want nothing in return.
So what does Hezbollah want in return? What would incentivize it?
This is not Hezbollah's decision. This is an Iranian asset. Iran established Hezbollah in the 80s. Iran invested billions of dollars to develop Hezbollah. How can you imagine Iran accepting to give up on all these billions of dollars and all this investment for free? There has to be something in return. There has to be a comprehensive deal. And when Ali Larijani, the top senior security official in Iran, he's the head of the National Security Council, went to Beirut, he told the Lebanese, what are you talking about? Like, it's not, Hezbollah is not going to give you it's not their decision. If you want to disarm Hezbollah, you need to speak to us. And the Americans know this. So this brings me to a very important point. Hezbollah's role was to be a threat to Israel and to work as a regional proxy for Iran. It's not anymore. So Hezbollah lost its 2 main causes, right? 2 main reasons to exist. Hezbollah is exposed. Hezbollah doesn't have the same weapons anymore. So Hezbollah is giving signs that it wants to disarm, but you have to speak with the main sponsor, which is Iran, or Iran has this asset to negotiate. It's one more card on the table, and it's one of the main cards on the table in any negotiation with the US. The Lebanese state knows this, and they voted anyway because they know that they can't disarm Hezbollah unless Iran and the US reach a deal. And the US knows that the Lebanese, it's like Friends episode, they know that we know that they know. So everyone knows exactly what's happening, and it all feels like staged. Hezbollah wants a safe face. Why? Because Hezbollah wants to secure its future. Hezbollah is not a regional proxy anymore or a regional power. It wants to be a political party dominating the Shia in Lebanon.
How is this being perceived on Lebanon's streets? Are the majority of people in favor? And for those who are not, and for those who see this as US intervention or foreign intervention, do their voices matter?
I think the biggest majority of Lebanese want state control over arms. And this new generation of political leaders, let's say, it's a very small fraction of the political regime in Lebanon. And they're starting to show that the Lebanese want something different. The Lebanese are tired of war, and the Lebanese are tired of conflict. And I think many within Hezbollah's entourage realized these last 2 years that Hezbollah had a Lebanese purpose in the beginning. They did it, and then they turned into a bigger regional project. And they don't want that. And when it comes to those who really support Hezbollah maintaining its weapons just to fight Israel in the future or for any other reason, once Hezbollah and come and tell them, look, we made a deal, Israel won't attack us anymore, our purpose is done, they will agree.
What happens if disarmament fails? What if that end of the year deadline doesn't happen? What happens to the Lebanese-US relationship?
If the disarmament doesn't happen, it means that there isn't a US-Iran agreement, which means that it's not only Lebanon that will pay the price, it's other places in the region. Lebanon will pay a price. 1, Israel will continue striking targets, killing people on a daily basis, fighters or others, or civilians. They will keep occupying the 5 areas in Lebanon. Maybe they will occupy more to put more pressure. 3, they will start, and they already started, creating some kind of a buffer zone between Lebanon and Israel. 4, Lebanon is broke, right? No one will pay any money. No sponsors, no donors, no conferences, nothing. 5, I think this is one of the main things that will happen. Many countries will give up on Lebanon, and Lebanon won't have friends anymore.
Without a doubt, Lebanon is long overdue for a fresh start. A status quo of violence and sectarianism is just no longer sustainable. But is disarmament simply replacing one foreign influence with another? And what future risks must this new government in Lebanon consider? To discuss this, I'm joined now by Nicholas Blanford, veteran Beirut-based analyst with the Atlantic Council in Washington. A year ago, the prospect of a disarmed Hezbollah might have been, or sounded like, a fantasy. But here we are today. We're moving towards this, but it all seems to be happening so quickly, and I wonder whether all the possible consequences have been weighed. Is this decision coming too prematurely?
So obviously we had the war between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah didn't come out of it particularly well. It lost a lot of its leadership. That combined with pressure from the US administration has led to this situation now where there's a feeling, certainly from, I think, the American perspective, is that the timing has never been better to try to have Hezbollah disarmed. Now, I think that the problem here is that the Lebanese state is really caught between a rock and a hard place. So on the one hand, they have the Americans who are leaning over the Lebanese government saying, you must disarm Hezbollah. Otherwise, there's going to be no reconstruction funds. Otherwise, the Israelis could come back into Lebanon. They're already occupying several points along the border in South Lebanon right now. They could escalate their near daily attacks against Hezbollah targets into something resembling a conflict again, like we had before. But on the other side, of course, Hezbollah is saying, we're not going to disarm. No way. And this is the dilemma that the government's found itself in, and is trying to navigate a way that appeases the Americans on the one side, but doesn't trigger, God forbid, a civil war on the other.
And when you say a rock and a hard place, are we also including Iran? Because that's the ultimate decision maker here, right, when it comes to disarmament. And even Iran doesn't have the leverage it once had with a weakened Hezbollah. Do you think that there will come a point where Iran is going to have to surrender its most strategic ally / bargaining chip, Hezbollah, or will it continue to push back against disarmament until it has the incentives to do so?
Probably the latter. I mean, it's clear that the Iranians are still committed to Hezbollah. Now, what that means in terms of supplying logistics, weapons, money is difficult to say in light of the recent conflict and the current ceasefire, and of course the enormous pressure that's being placed on Iran. But for now, the Iranians have made it clear that they continue to support Hezbollah being an armed entity. But yes, you're right. I mean, ultimately, one of the ways of trying to resolve this peacefully, to have Hezbollah disarmed, is you need to go to Tehran and you have to strike some kind of deal. I don't know if there are these talks going on under the table between the Americans and the Iranians on that specific issue. There have been talks on the broader issues of Iran's nuclear program and so on. But that would, in a way, be the simplest form. If the Iranians were able to strike some kind of deal with the Americans, with the West in general, that could be a way of facilitating a smooth transition where Hezbollah goes from being an armed actor into a purely political player in Lebanon, albeit with or without its social welfare apparatus as well.
We know that the deadline for disarmament is towards the end of the year. What are the consequences for Hezbollah itself if it does disarm? What happens to the fighters? What happens to the apparatus? What happens to, what they call the state within the state?
Well, this is the big problem that Hezbollah faces, because at the end of the day, Hezbollah is about muqawama, it's about resistance. Yes, they've got all these other elements to the organization now, and they're important in their own right, whether it's the parliamentary presence, the seats in government, the huge social welfare apparatus of schools, clinics, hospitals, and so on. But let's face it, when Hezbollah emerged in 1982 following the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, They didn't emerge because they wanted to educate the Shia community or provide hospitals for them or to get into parliament one day. They emerged as a jihadi resistance force determined to resist the Israeli occupation. So this is the raison d'etre of Hezbollah. The beating heart of Hezbollah is its weapons, is its army, is its military capability. All the other aspects of the organization that have emerged over the decades from 82, these are all really there to sustain and protect what they call the resistance priority. So if you suddenly take the weapons away and you dismantle the Islamic resistance, you have to look at what's left. First of all, the Iranians may conclude, well, if Hezbollah is no longer armed, it's not really an asset for us anymore. Therefore, why should we continue spending lots of money on Hezbollah to fund their schools and hospitals when they can't really do anything for us in the region anymore? So you could have a situation where the funding from Iran, if it doesn't completely dry up, it could be greatly reduced. And in that case, how is Hezbollah going to fund its social welfare apparatus? It doesn't generate enough cash to do it alone. So that could mean that not only are you letting go tens of thousands of combatants, you could be letting go of tens of thousands of people who are in their civilian apparatus, doctors, nurses, school teachers, and so on and so forth, none of whom are going to be particularly happy at losing their jobs. And if you take away the social welfare apparatus, what's left? You've got a handful of guys in parliament and a seat or two in the government. And that is a very pale shadow to what Hezbollah has been, particularly in the last 2 decades. Hence the obstinacy, if you like, and the determination to retain their weapons.
All of this is happening while Israel continues to bombard Lebanon, violating the ceasefire hundreds of times over. What guarantees are there that Israel won't violate its terms of the disarmament agreement too, even after Hezbollah is disarmed? What guarantees are there that it's not going to just expand its territory in Lebanon?
I think there are no guarantees. There are no really hard guarantees. The Lebanese would have to take the word of the Americans, the international community writ large, the United Nations presumably as well. I think that part of the problem now is that one could argue, maybe in years past, that if the Israelis felt there was no threat coming from Lebanon, they would have no interest to intervene in Lebanon. I'm not so sure that's the case, given the behavior of the Netanyahu government, particularly in the last couple of years, since October the 7th, 2023. And we've seen the moves that the Israelis have made in Syria, for example, after the Bashar al-Assad regime collapsed, and they moved into the area of separation, the Golan Heights. They've been creeping up Lebanon's southeast border in Mount Hermon. Obviously, they've been staging airstrikes, which they've been doing, mind you, since 2013. But that doesn't particularly bring a great deal of encouragement, I think, to many Lebanese who are basically saying, okay, we'll give up Hezbollah's weapons, and then we'll just have to hope that the Americans keep the Israelis on check. And, the Israelis have always ideologically, not practically, had an interest in settling parts of South Lebanon. But we've seen since the ceasefire, there have been some extremist groups within Israel that have come across the border into Lebanon. They've been turned back by the Israeli military. But we've seen similar things more recently in Syria. Of course, just in the last week, there were settlers who crossed into Syrian territory and laid foundation stones for what they hoped would be a future settlement. Now, they were chased back across into Israel by the Israeli military. But these are not encouraging signs necessarily for the Lebanese when they discuss the process of disarming Hezbollah and wondering what is going to come next.
As we saw speaking in Beirut this week, U.S. envoy Tom Barrack quite literally proposed a substitution for Tehran's influence through economic incentives in Lebanon. So there is a sort of, or seemingly a mechanism that the U.S. is trying to impose for some semblance of a guarantee/incentive. Does this mean that the U.S. is going to be the influential power in Lebanon now? And if so, does that work for Lebanon?
I think there are no guarantees on this either, because we have, let's face it, a very fickle president in the White House whose mood changes at the drop of a hat. And although the US administration in general, and I think this goes into the State Department and the Department of Defense, have a general interest in Lebanon. And obviously the Americans have invested, along with other countries, quite heavily in the Lebanese army over the last decade and a half, which has made a difference to the Lebanese army. It's certainly stronger than it was. But there are no guarantees that interest in Lebanon will continue once the issue of Hezbollah's disarmament is resolved, if indeed it is resolved at all. So it's not an easy moment for Lebanon.
That's it for Beyond the Headlines. Visit thenationalnews.com for more reporting and new developments on the disarmament of Hezbollah and beyond. This episode was produced by Ban Barqawi, audio engineered by Arthur Edison. Dua Farid is our editor, and I'm your host, Nada AlTaher. Thank you for listening.